I never imagined that the moment which would change my entire understanding of who I am would come quietly, in the hush of a lawyer's office on a gray Thursday afternoon. My name is Charlotte Davis. I'm 36 years old, and until that day, I thought I knew my family history, maybe not in perfect detail, but well enough to trust its shape. My mother, Evelyn, had always been a quiet, private woman. She kept her memories close to her chest, revealing them in tiny, carefully chosen stories. Growing up, I accepted that some chapters of her life were too painful to share. I never pushed. I suppose part of me feared what I might find. When my mother died last spring, it wasn't unexpected. She'd been ill for years, and in some ways I had already started mourning her long before she was gone. But sitting in that small, sunlit office, as her lawyer read her will, grief took on a different weight, a sharp, cutting edge that I hadn't prepared for. Most of what she owned was left to me. The modest family home, some savings, a few pieces of jewelry, but at the end of the document, there was a single, almost hidden line. To my daughter Charlotte, I leave the small, locked box from my bedside drawer. Its contents are hers alone. My heart stumbled when I heard it. A locked box? I'd never seen it, or perhaps never noticed. And what could possibly be inside that was meant only for me? The lawyer, Mr. Howard, handed me a heavy envelope with my name written on it in my mother's looping, old-fashioned handwriting. Inside was a brass key and a brief note. Charlotte, there are truths I couldn't bring myself to speak aloud. You may never forgive me, but you deserve to know. Those words settled into my chest like ice. The idea that my mother-me, kind, gentle mother had carried a secret all these years terrified me more than I could say. That evening, I drove to her house, the house where I'd grown up. Everything smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, exactly as it had when she was alive. In her bedroom, the pale curtains still moved softly in the breeze. I found the box easily. Small, wooden, with delicate floral carvings on the lid, it looked older than I was. For several minutes, I just sat there, the key in my hand, unable to move. What if whatever lay inside changed everything? What if it changed how I remembered her? Finally, my hands trembling, I turned the key. The lock clicked open, quiet and final. Inside, carefully stacked, were several yellowed envelopes, tied together with a faded ribbon. Some had my name on them, others were addressed to E. And at the bottom lay something that caught my breath completely. A black and white photograph of a young woman who looked hauntingly like me, yet not quite. I picked it up, studying every line of her face. The resemblance was so strong, it felt impossible, and yet, I knew instantly this was not my mother. The photo was dated June 1967, long before I was born. I sat on the edge of my mother's bed, the letters in my lap, and for a moment, it felt as though the air had thickened around me. I could almost hear her voice, so many times gentle and protective, whispering in my ear, "Some things are better left in the past, Charlotte." But she hadn't left them in the past, had she? She'd left them for me to find. I untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. It was addressed to me, in handwriting that looked different from my mother's, more angular and deliberate. My eyes caught on the words, "My dearest Charlotte, though we've never met," and something inside me shattered. Never met? The letter continued. "I have watched from afar all these years, knowing you exist, brought me comfort in ways you cannot imagine. I had to stop reading. Tears blurred the words, and my hands shook so badly I almost dropped the page. Who was this? And how could someone I'd never met write to me with such tenderness? I looked at the signature. One word, Rose. That name meant nothing to me, at least not yet. I spent the whole night on my mother's bed, reading letter after letter. Piece by piece, an unfamiliar story began to take shape, and it was nothing like the family history I thought I knew. The woman in the photo, Rose, was my grandmother, but not the woman I'd been told about, the grandmother who, according to my mother, had died young and left almost nothing behind. Rose had lived. She had written letters. and she had loved fiercely from the shadows. In one of the envelopes, I found something else. An old newspaper clipping, fragile and yellow with age. The headline read, "Local woman's baby placed for adoption after scandal." The date, 1968. My heart hammered as realization dawned. This wasn't some distant family story, this was my mother's story. Was my mother adopted? If so, why hide it from me? And why keep these letters? As dawn broke, the bedroom looked different. Dust motes floated in the pale morning light, and the world felt both smaller and so much bigger than before. The woman I'd called Mom had carried a secret so large it nearly broke me to learn it. And the biggest question remained: why? Why keep the truth locked away? Why leave it to be discovered only after she was gone? I knew then that my journey was only beginning. The answers wouldn't be found in letters alone. I needed to know who Rose truly was, why my mother had buried her memory, and what else had been hidden from me. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to learn to forgive. The next few days blurred into one long ache of searching, thinking, and barely sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rose's face in that photograph so like mine, yet shadowed by secrets I couldn't yet name. I took time off work, telling my boss that I needed to handle family matters. The words felt strange on my tongue. Family matters had always meant birthdays, anniversaries, the occasional disagreement over Thanksgiving dinner. Now it felt like family itself was shifting under my feet. The first place I went was the local records office, clutching the newspaper, clipping, and Rose's letters in my bag like talismans. I sat at an old wooden desk under harsh fluorescent lights, scrolling through decades-old microfilm and fragile documents. It took hours, but finally I found her. Rose Montgomery, born 1947, daughter of Charles and Edith Montgomery. And in 1968, a birth record. Evelyn Montgomery, mother. Rose Montgomery, father, unknown. Next to the record, a stamped note in faded ink. Adoption finalized, March 1968. Adopted. My mother had been adopted. And yet, the family story was that my grandmother died young, not that my mother had been taken in by another family. Why lie about that? What had been so shameful, so frightening, that the truth had to be buried? My next stop was the local library's archive. I pored over old newspaper articles, looking for anything about Rose after 1968, but there was nothing. It was as though she'd vanished. That night, back at the house, I read Rose's letters again. This time, slowly, searching for details I'd missed. One letter stood out. "I know you may never read this, but if you do, I hope you'll understand. I wasn't allowed to keep you, and by the time I could have come back, too many walls had been built between us. But I have loved you every single day." It wasn't addressed to me, it was to my mother. I traced the handwriting with my fingertip, trying to imagine my mother as a baby, as a little girl who maybe grew up wondering why she felt different, why there was a space no one else could fill. And then I thought about my own life, how my mother had never been comfortable talking about her childhood, how she'd seemed to live with a wound she couldn't name. I began to realize that what I'd uncovered wasn't just my mother's secret, it was her pain, carried silently for decades. I decided to find out what happened to Rose after the adoption. Using what I'd learned, I tracked down an address from the late 1970s, a small town about 2 hours away. It was a Saturday morning when I drove there, my heart pounding the whole way. The house I found was small and neat, with flower boxes on the windows and a faded white fence. I stood at the gate for a long time before I gathered the courage to knock. A woman answered, older than my mother would have been, with soft gray hair and kind eyes. When I introduced myself and mentioned Rose Montgomery, her expression changed from curiosity to something like sorrowful recognition. "Oh, sweetheart," she said gently, "you'd better come in." We sat at her kitchen table and she poured me tea with hands that trembled just slightly. Her name was Margaret, and she had been Rose's closest friend. "Rose was a wonderful person," Margaret began, her voice warm but lined with grief. but she had a very hard life. She told me what my mother had never known. After being forced to give up her baby, Rose had left town, heartbroken and ashamed. In those days, Margaret explained, an unmarried mother was branded for life. Rose moved away to start over, but she never stopped loving her child. Every year on her birthday, Margaret said softly, Rose would buy a small gift and write a letter. She never mailed them. She kept them in a box. My breath caught. Do you still have them? I asked. Margaret shook her head. When Rose passed, her brother came and cleared out her things. I think he didn't understand, or maybe he didn't want to understand. He threw them away. The thought of those letters, dozens of them lost forever, brought tears to my eyes. But Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She never stopped loving your mother, she whispered. And I think, in her way, she loved you too, even if she never met you. Driving home, my mind was spinning. My mother had grown up without knowing that the woman who bore her had loved her deeply, had mourned her absence for a lifetime. And I had grown up without knowing that my mother's silence was built on heartbreak, not rejection. I remembered the words in Rose's letter. You may never forgive me, but you deserve to know. It wasn't forgiveness I felt. It was something deeper. An aching, fragile compassion for two women bound by love and silence, neither able to say the words they most needed to hear. Back at the house, I stood in my mother's room, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. I opened the box again, hoping for something I'd missed. At the bottom, beneath the letters, I found a tiny velvet pouch. Inside was a locket, worn but beautiful. I clicked it open and gasped softly. On one side was a photo of Rose as a young woman. On the other side, a baby. My mother. It felt like the universe had conspired to reunite them in that small piece of gold. And, through them, to remind me that love endures, even when it's hidden, even when it's buried beneath pain and silence. That evening, I sat alone in the quiet living room. The locket warm in my palm from where I'd been turning it over and over. Outside, the sun had set, and the only light came from a small lamp on the side table. The silence felt heavy, but oddly comforting, like the house itself was holding space for what came next. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. My mother's sister, Aunt Helen, deserved to know, and perhaps my cousins, too. For years, our family gatherings had been polite, cheerful, and a little shallow, no one daring to peel back the layers of history. But now I had something real. Something that connected us to the truth. I picked up the phone, hesitated, then dialed Helen's number. When she answered, her familiar, warm voice made my throat tighten. Aunt Helen, I began, my voice shaking. I found something in Mom's things. About her birth mother. There was a long pause. Oh, Charlotte, she said quietly. I always wondered if you might. We met the next afternoon at a small cafe near her house. I brought the letters, the newspaper clipping, and of course, the locket. Helen listened silently as I laid it all out, her eyes brimming with tears. When I finished, she took a slow breath. You know, she whispered, your mother never spoke of it. Not once. But there were moments. Sometimes at night I'd hear her crying, and when I asked, she'd say it was nothing. I never believed her, but I thought it wasn't my place to press. For the first time, I saw my mother not just as my mother, but as someone's lost child, someone's secret heartbreak. Helen touched the locket gently, her fingers trembling. She would have wanted to know, she murmured. And I think, deep down, she did know, in some way. Later, we drove together to the cemetery. Helen wanted to come, she said it felt right. At my mother's grave, I knelt down, the summer breeze stirring my hair. The gravestone, simple and dignified, bore only her name, her dates, and the words, Beloved Mother. I found her, Mom, I whispered, my voice catching. I found Rose. She never forgot you. She loved you every day she was alive. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but for the first time, they weren't only tears of grief. They were tears of understanding, of connection, a bridge across decades of silence. I placed the locket at the base of the stone, resting it against the marble. Just for a moment, a way to let my mother and Rose meet at last, if only symbolically. Back at home, Helen and I sat in the kitchen over cups of tea. The quiet comforting rather than heavy this time. "I think you should keep the locket," she said softly. "It's part of your story now, too." I nodded. "I want to," I said, "but maybe I'll make a copy for everyone in the family, so we all remember where we came from." For the first time, I felt the burden of the secret transform into something else, a gift, a chance to heal, to honor the women who had come before me. In the following weeks, I traced more of Rose's life. Margaret helped me find old friends of hers, people who shared stories about a woman who was kind, quick to laugh, but always carried a quiet sadness. I learned that Rose had worked as a nurse's aide for years, dedicating her life to caring for others. She never married, never had more children. But she volunteered at a local shelter, baked for neighbors, and sent anonymous donations to children's charities every Christmas. "She had so much love to give," Margaret told me one evening over the phone, "and even though she couldn't give it to your mother directly, she gave it to the world." The last piece of my journey was standing outside Rose's grave. Her headstone was modest, nearly hidden among larger monuments. I knelt, tracing the engraved letters. "I wish I could have met you," I whispered, "but I'm glad I know you now, and I promise, your story won't be forgotten." A soft breeze rustled the nearby trees, and I closed my eyes, imagining, for just a moment, that somewhere beyond what we see, Rose and my mother were finally together, a reunion decades overdue. In the months that followed, our family began to speak of Rose more openly. Helen helped me piece together a small family history book, complete with the letters and photographs. At Christmas, I gave copies to my cousins, and for once, the holiday felt truly connected, grounded in something deeper than gifts and decorations. And as for me, I felt lighter, as though by honoring the past, I'd freed myself to step forward more whole. I realized the truth doesn't always bring only pain. Sometimes, it brings healing. Sometimes, it makes room for love to finally breathe.